My name is Claire Mercer. I'm 31 years old. I work nights as a radiology technician in Raleigh, reading scans in the dark, finding the things hiding just outside where everyone else is looking. The week my father retired, I watched my family become people I didn't recognize. Over a boat, a cabin, a savings account they hadn't earned, hadn't asked about, and somehow already felt entitled to before my father had finished his last shift. I stayed quiet through all of it. I had learned a long time ago that quiet was my strongest position. Then on a Tuesday evening, my father pressed a key into my hand and whispered 4 words that explained everything I had been too patient to understand. Don't tell them about the storage unit. What was behind that door, and what happened when my family finally found out, is the part none of them saw coming. If your family ever mistook your silence for weakness, this one is for you. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. The storage unit is only the beginning. Now let me take you back to the dinner that started all of it. My father's name is Walter Mercer, 63 years old, 40 years at the same manufacturing company, same building, same parking spot near the side entrance that everyone else avoided because the drainage was bad and your shoes got wet if it had rained in the last 3 days. He retired on a Thursday in March with a card signed by 62 coworkers and a handshake from a regional manager who had started the job 4 years ago and did not know my father's last name without checking his notes. My father did not mind this. He is not a man who needs rooms to know his name. He taught me to read a level when I was 8 years old, not because I asked, because he was using one and I was watching, and he handed it to me and said, "See the bubble, you want it centered, not close, centered." He taught me to check the load-bearing wall before you renovate, to measure twice, to look at the thing in front of you until you actually understand what it contains, rather than what you assumed it would contain when you walked over to look at it. He taught my brother and sister to ask him for things. That is not a criticism of him. It is an accurate description of what each of us learned from proximity to the same man. Marcus and Diane learned that Walter Mercer was someone you approached when you needed something. I learned that he was someone you stood beside when he was working. The difference between those 2 educations is the whole story. There's a brass key on a plain ring in the drawer of my nightstand. I have known about it since I was 12 years old. My father left it on the kitchen counter once, and I asked what it was for, and he said storage and put it in his shirt pocket. Years later, after I moved out and came back for a visit, I found it in the junk drawer near the phone and looked at it for a moment before putting it back. It had a paper tag attached, his handwriting, a number, Unit 14. I did not know which facility. I did not know what Unit 14 contained. I had no reason to think about it because nothing in my life had given me a reason to think about it. Until the retirement dinner, until my brother opened his mouth, until I sat at my father's kitchen table and understood, with the clarity of someone who reads images for a living, that the family I had grown up in had a structure I had been misreading for 31 years. My brother Marcus is 35. He has the particular confidence of someone who has been keeping score in a game he invented and believes he is winning. He helped my father move twice. He showed up for the garage sale 3 years ago and carried boxes for 4 hours and ate a sandwich my mother made and told the story about it at Thanksgiving. He mowed the lawn the summer my father's back went out. In Marcus's internal accounting, these acts are deposits, 35 years of deposits. And retirement, in his framework, is the withdrawal window. The boat represents something specific to him. Not the boat itself, but the version of himself that has a boat. The man who earns something visible, something that sits in a driveway, and says something to the neighbors about the kind of person who owns it. He has been promising himself this version for years. My father's retirement felt, to Marcus, like the moment the promise became collectible. My sister Diane is 33. Her claim on the cabin is different in its shape, but not in its structure. She was happy there as a child in the specific way children are happy in places that ask nothing of them, and she has spent her adult life trying to reconstruct that happiness through ownership. She believes that feeling the most attachment to a place creates the strongest right to it. She is not wrong that she loves the cabin more than anyone else. She is wrong that love is the same as claim. My mother runs on a principle she has stated so many times it has become ambient in our household. There is enough for everyone. She says it with the warmth of someone offering abundance and the function of someone avoiding conflict. Her softness is not neutral. It is the environment that allows Marcus and Diane to escalate, because the escalation never produces the friction that would require them to stop. You cannot grow a fire without oxygen, and my mother has been supplying oxygen to both of them for 35 years while describing it as generosity. The retirement dinner was on a Saturday. My father was on the back porch when we arrived, checking the boards he had been meaning to replace for 2 seasons. My mother was in the kitchen. The table was set with the good dishes she used for occasions she wanted to mark. Marcus arrived with his wife and went directly to the kitchen. Diane arrived with photographs, actual printed photographs of the cabin from 3 summers she had selected as representative of what the cabin meant to her. She set them on the sideboard near the door without comment, the way you place evidence you intend to reference later. My father came in from the porch and washed his hands at the kitchen sink and sat at the head of the table, and my mother brought out the food, and for approximately 11 minutes it was an ordinary family dinner. Then my father stepped back to the kitchen for something, and Marcus looked at his phone and said the boat's market value had come up on a search he had done earlier. He said the number. He said it casually, the way people say things they have already decided about in the privacy of their own reasoning and are now simply making audible. Diane said the cabin should stay in the family. My mother said there was enough for everyone and passed the bread. Nobody asked what I thought, not because they were hostile. Not because they had weighed the question and decided my input was not worth soliciting. It genuinely did not occur to them. I had been quiet in these conversations for long enough that my presence in them had become furniture, background, the person who was there without being a participant. Then Marcus, without looking up from his phone, said 7 words. "Claire doesn't really need anything. She's fine." He said it the way you state a fact about weather. Not cruelly. Not with awareness that I was sitting 3 feet away at the same table. It was the family's entire operating theory about me, stated aloud without anyone registering that the subject of the theory was present to hear it. My mother nodded slightly. Diane was looking at her photographs. My father came back from the kitchen and sat down, and the conversation moved on. I finished my dinner. I said nothing, but I thought about the key in my nightstand drawer, the paper tag, Unit 14, my father's handwriting. I thought about what my father had taught me when I was 8 years old. See the bubble. You want it centered. Not close, centered. I had been reading this family for 31 years, and I had been reading it correctly. I had just not yet understood what the image contained. I work nights because the hospital pays a differential, and because there is something about reading scans in the dark that suits the way my mind works. The reading room is quiet. The images are on the screen. My job is to look at what is actually there rather than what should be there, or what the referring physician suspected, or what the patient hoped. A hairline fracture does not care whether you are ready to find it. It is either present or it is not. And the only variable is whether you are looking at the right part of the image with enough patience to see it. I have found fractures that had been missed for 6 weeks. I have found shadows that changed the entire clinical picture. I have found things that were hiding in the part of the scan everyone else had already decided was unremarkable. You have to know where to look, and you have to be willing to see what is there rather than what you expected. My family had never been willing to look at me that way. My father had been looking at me that way since I was 8 years old, with a level in my hands. 2 days after the dinner, Marcus sent a message to the family group chat, a proposal for a family meeting to discuss the estate. He used the word fair 3 times. He listed the assets he believed required discussion. The boat, the cabin, the savings account, a paragraph about the importance of transparency and equal consideration. My name was not in the message, not omitted with hostility, simply not present, not listed as a stakeholder, not included in the agenda, not referenced as someone whose input was part of the process being proposed. Diane liked the message within 4 minutes. My mother replied with a heart. I read the thread from the reading room during my night shift, phone screen bright in the dark beside the scan I was working through. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the console and went back to the image in front of me. A left shoulder, subtle peristeel reaction along the clavicle. The kind of thing that hides in plain sight until you have looked at enough images to know where hiding happens. I found it. I documented it. I moved to the next scan. Then I picked up my phone and typed 2 words into the group chat. Let me know when. I watched the typing indicators appear. Both of them. Diane first, then Marcus. I watched the indicators go still. Neither message sent. I put the phone back in my pocket. I went back to the dark and the screens and the fractures that had been waiting for someone patient enough to find them. The family meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday. Marcus sent a second message Thursday evening confirming the time and listing 3 items for discussion with the organized precision of a man who had been thinking about this longer than the week since the retirement announcement. The boat, the cabin, financial planning going forward. He had attached a document. 2 pages, a summary of what each asset was worth and what fair distribution might look like, organized in a format that communicated he had spent real time on it. I read the document twice. He had not mentioned my name anywhere in it, not in the asset discussion, not in the proposed distribution, not in the section labeled going forward, which outlined what each family member might reasonably expect from the estate planning process. I was a family member who would attend the meeting. I was not, in Marcus's document, a family member who would receive anything from it. I filed that. I did not respond to the message. On Friday afternoon, I called Sandra. She was the attorney I had found through a colleague at the hospital, a woman who handled estate and family law, and who had been recommended with the phrase, "She will tell you exactly what you need to know and nothing you don't." I had looked her up, read her firm's website, and called the following morning. The consultation was 45 minutes and cost me a flat fee that I considered the most productive money I had spent in recent memory. Sandra explained the difference between a gift and an inheritance. A gift transferred during a person's lifetime is generally the giver's to give as they choose, provided the person is of sound mind and not under coercion. Documentation strengthens the position of the recipient but is not always required. An inheritance distributed through a will is subject to probate and can be contested under specific circumstances. The key, Sandra said, and she meant this both literally and legally, was documentation. She asked whether my father was of sound mind. I said he had been checking load-bearing walls and recalculating drainage solutions on the back porch 3 days ago. She said that was a reasonable indicator. She said, "Whatever your father gives you, make sure there is a record of the giving." His intention stated in writing. Dated. Witnessed, if possible. I said I understood. She said, "The fact that your siblings are already discussing legal consultation is not nothing. It means they are preparing a position. You should understand your position before the meeting." I said I did. She said, "Good. Call me after the meeting if anything develops." I drove home and ate cereal standing at the counter and thought about the scan I had read that afternoon, the one where the fracture had been hiding in the lateral view while everyone looked at the anterior. Standard approach finds nothing. Different angle finds everything. I thought about the storage unit. I thought about my father's handwriting on the paper tag. I had not driven there yet. I was waiting. Saturday morning, 2 hours before the meeting, my phone rang. A number I recognized as belonging to Carol Hendricks, a woman who had been close to our family for 20 years, a person my mother called when things went wrong, and who I had always trusted with the specific trust you extend to someone who has been consistent over decades. Carol said she wanted me to know something before I walked into that meeting. Her voice had the careful quality of someone delivering information they believe is helpful, and have not fully examined for whether helpful is the same as kind. She said Marcus had spoken to an attorney, not an estate attorney, a family law attorney who handled contested distributions. He had been asking questions, she said, about what options existed if assets were transferred in ways that bypassed the formal estate process. She said, "I just thought you should know, sweetheart. He loves you. He's just scared." I thanked her. I told her I appreciated the call. I ended it. I sat for a moment. Marcus had consulted a family law attorney about contesting informal transfers. The only informal transfer I was aware of was the key in my nightstand drawer, which meant either Marcus knew about the storage unit or he suspected my father had given me something outside the formal distribution, or both. I went to the nightstand. I picked up the key. Plain ring, paper tag, my father's handwriting. Unit 14. The gate code written below it in pencil so faint I had to tilt it toward the window light to read it. I had been holding this key for 3 days, and I had not driven to the facility, and I had not opened the unit, and I had not looked at what my father had been keeping behind that door. I put the key in my pocket. I drove to the family meeting. The meeting was at my parents' house. My mother had put out coffee and the good mugs, which was her way of signaling that she wanted the conversation to have the quality of something civilized. Marcus arrived with his document printed and distributed before anyone had taken off their coats. Diane had brought the cabin photographs again, which told me she had decided physical evidence of emotional attachment was a persuasive strategy she intended to deploy consistently. My father sat at the head of the table and said very little. I watched him. He had the quality of someone who has made a decision and is now watching other people arrive at the edges of it, not detached, present in the specific way of someone who is observing rather than participating, who has already completed the internal work that everyone else is still beginning. Marcus opened with the document. He walked through the assets methodically. The boat, currently valued at a number he had confirmed with 2 separate marine dealers. The cabin, assessed at a figure that had surprised even him when he looked it up. The savings account, which he addressed carefully and without stating a specific number, saying only that the family deserved transparency about what existed and what a fair approach to distribution might look like. He was not unreasonable. That was the thing about Marcus in this setting. He had prepared. He was organized. He had a framework. And the framework had its own internal logic, the logic of a man who had been making deposits for 35 years and believed the ledger was accurate. Diane said the cabin held emotional significance that could not be quantified, and that ownership of it should account for the degree of attachment each person had demonstrated over the years. My mother said there was enough for everyone. Nobody asked me anything. I sat with my coffee and I listened, and I watched my father watch the room. At one point he caught my eye across the table. He held the look for 3 seconds, not communicating anything I could have translated into language, just checking, the way you check a level, seeing whether the bubble is centered. I held his look and did not look away. He returned to his coffee. Marcus was saying something about the importance of formalizing decisions before they became complicated. After the meeting, my father walked me to my car. The others were still inside. My mother was clearing the coffee cups. Marcus was on his phone. Diane was looking at her photographs. My father walked beside me in the specific, unhurried way he moved when he had something to say and was going to say it in his own time. At the car, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder. He said, "You see things the way I do." That was the whole sentence. He went back inside. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, then I drove to the storage facility. There were 4 facilities within 12 miles of my parents' house. I had looked them all up. 1 had individual locks, 1 had a gate code system, 2 had both. The gate code on the paper tag was 6 digits. I had memorized it the morning after my father gave me the key. The facility was on a county road 12 minutes from the house, behind a farm supply store, the kind of location that is unremarkable by design. A gate, rows of corrugated metal units, gravel between them, the particular quiet of a place where things are being kept rather than used. I entered the gate code. The gate rolled open. Unit 14 was at the back of the 3rd row. I walked to it. Gravel under my shoes, the late afternoon light at an angle that made the units cast long shadows across the path. I put the key in the lock. I turned it. The door rolled up. I want to describe what I found in that unit with the precision the contents deserve. The unit was 10 by 15 feet, climate-controlled, which I had not expected and which told me something about how long the contents had been maintained and how deliberately. Along the left wall, 4 metal filing cabinets, the kind that lock, each one labeled in my father's handwriting with a year range. The earliest label read 1981 to 1989. The most recent read 2019 to present. Along the back wall, a workbench. The same style as the one in his garage, same height, same organization. Tools hung on a pegboard above it in the sequence he always used, the sequence he had taught me to restore after using any of them, because a tool out of place is a tool you spend time looking for when you need it. On the workbench, a brass level. Old. The kind with the original vial, the bubble slightly yellowed with age. I had used this level. I recognized the small chip on the lower left corner from an afternoon when I was 9 and dropped it on the concrete, and my father said, "Don't worry, the chip doesn't affect the reading," and showed me how to verify it by reversing the level and checking whether the bubble centered in the same position. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I went to the filing cabinets. The first drawer I opened, labeled 2015 to 2018, contained folders, each one labeled in the compressed handwriting he used for things he considered important: property records, account statements, insurance documentation. A folder labeled Claire, work that held printouts of 3 articles I had published in a radiology journal and a conference program from a presentation I had given 2 years ago. He had circled my name in the program with a ballpoint pen. I put the folder down. I opened the drawer labeled 2019 to present. Toward the back, behind a folder of tax records, was an envelope. Plain white, my name on the front in his handwriting. I took it to the workbench. I sat on the stool he kept there, and I opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages. His handwriting, which I had been reading my entire life, the compressed functional script of a man who wrote to communicate rather than to be admired for the writing. He wrote that he had been building the storage unit's contents since 1981, the year he started at the company, the year before Marcus was born. He wrote that he had always understood money as something you documented before you discussed and protected, before you distributed. He wrote that he had learned this from his own father, who had lost everything once due to the absence of records and had rebuilt everything through the discipline of keeping them. He wrote that he had watched his children differently as they grew up, not with preference, with assessment, the way you assess a structure not to judge it but to understand what it can hold. He wrote that Marcus was a man who needed things to be visible, that the boat was the right gift for Marcus because Marcus would take care of something he could see. He wrote that Diane's relationship with the cabin was real, and that ownership would give her something she had been trying to locate for years. He hoped it would be enough. Then he wrote about me. He wrote that I had never asked him for anything, not because I had not needed things, because I had always found a way to solve the problem before I would accept the limitation of needing someone else to solve it for me. He wrote that he had watched me do this since I was 8 years old and that he recognized it because he had done the same thing his entire life. He wrote that the filing cabinets contained 40 years of financial records, accounts my siblings had no knowledge of, a property he had purchased in 2009 and held in a separate entity, documentation of every financial decision he had made since 1981, organized so that someone who understood financial records could reconstruct the full picture without anyone's assistance. He wrote that he was giving this to me not because I was his favorite, those were his exact words, not because you are my favorite, because you are the one who will understand what it means, because you will know what to do with it and you will do it right. He wrote that the brass level on the workbench had been his father's. He wanted me to have it. He wrote one final line: "You learn to read the bubble. The others learn to ask someone else to do it for them." That was the last line. I folded the letter along the creases he had made. I sat on the stool in the storage unit in the late afternoon light coming through the open door, and I held my father's letter and I thought about 40 years, of a man building something in a room no one else knew about, waiting for the person who would know what to do with it. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the specific weight of being trusted by someone who did not trust easily. Outside, the gate code beeped as another vehicle entered the facility. I did not move for a long time. When I finally stood, I picked up the brass level from the workbench. I tilted it gently. The bubble centered. Not close. Centered. I drove home from the storage unit with the letter on the passenger seat and the brass level wrapped in the flannel cloth my father kept folded on his workbench for exactly that purpose. He had thought about how I would carry it home. That detail sat with me the entire drive. I called Sandra the following morning, not from urgency, from the understanding that what I had found in that unit was not just emotionally significant but legally significant, and that the distance between those two things required professional attention before it required family conversation. Sandra answered on the second ring. I described the contents, the filing cabinets, the letter, the property held in a separate entity, the accounts my siblings had no knowledge of. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Bring me the letter and the property documentation, this week if possible." I went Thursday afternoon with a folder I had organized from the filing cabinet, the way my father had organized everything chronologically, with the most recent documentation at the front. Sandra read for 25 minutes without speaking. The kind of reading that is also thinking. I recognized it from the reading room. When she finished, she set the folder on her desk and looked at me with the expression of someone who has just confirmed something they suspected. She said, "Your father structured this correctly. The property entity is clean. The accounts are documented. The letter establishes intent without ambiguity." She said, "The question is not whether this is legally yours." It is. The question is how the family finds out and what position they are in when they do. I said, "Marcus has been consulting a family law attorney." She said, "I know, which means he is preparing to contest something he suspects but cannot yet identify. The moment this becomes visible, he will redirect that preparation toward it." I asked what she recommended. She said, "Let me send a letter, not aggressive, informational. A letter that establishes your father's gift, references the documentation, and invites anyone with questions to direct them to my office. It goes to your father first for his review and signature, then to the family." I said, "My father will need to see it before anyone else." She said, "That is the only way I would do it." I left her office and drove to my parents' house. My father was on the back porch replacing the boards he had been assessing since before his retirement. He was wearing the work clothes he wore for projects, the ones my mother had been unsuccessfully attempting to retire for a decade, and he was moving with the deliberate efficiency of a man who has measured twice and is now simply executing. I sat on the step and watched him work for a moment. He knew I was there. He had heard the car and the side gate and my footsteps on the gravel. He continued working because the board required finishing before the light changed, and he was a man who finished what he started before he began something else. When he set down the hammer, he turned and looked at me. I had found the storage unit. He already knew that. He could see it the way he saw everything, without needing it stated. I told him about Sandra's letter, what it would say, what it would establish, that it would go to him first. He was quiet for a moment with the look he used when he was checking a level, seeing whether the bubble was where it should be. Then he said, "Send it." 2 words, the same economy he brought to everything he considered already decided. He picked up the hammer and went back to the board. I sat on the step a little longer in the late afternoon light and listened to the sound of my father fixing something he had measured twice before touching. Sandra's letter arrived at the family home on a Tuesday. Marcus called before noon, not to ask, to demand. His voice had the compressed quality of someone who had been preparing for a confrontation and had finally found the trigger for it. He said he needed to know what was going on. He said the family deserved transparency. He said the word fair twice in the first minute. I was at work when he called. I let it go to voicemail. His message lasted 4 minutes. I listened to it once, noted the relevant points, and texted Sandra to let her know he had received the letter. She replied within minutes. "I expected his call. Direct him to my office if he contacts you again. Marcus contacted me again that evening. I sent him Sandra's number. The conversation that broke things open happened not with Marcus, but with my mother. She called 2 days after the letter arrived. Her voice did not have the performing quality it carried when she was managing a situation. It had the stripped quality of someone who has run out of management and is simply present with what is in front of her. She said she had not known about the storage unit. I said I had not known until my father gave me the key. She said, "How long has he been building it?" I said, "Since 1981. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He never told me either." I had not expected that. I sat with it. She said, "I knew he was careful with money. I knew there were accounts I didn't have full visibility into. He always said he was protecting it, and I trusted him, and I stopped asking." She said, "I am not upset. I want you to know that. I understand why he did what he did. Your father has always understood things about this family that he chose to address quietly rather than directly." She said, "I have been saying there is enough for everyone for 30 years. I think I knew it was not always true. I said it anyway because saying something different would have required a different kind of mother than I knew how to be. That was the most honest thing my mother had said to me in a very long time. I said it required a different kind of daughter too. For a long time I couldn't figure out how to be her." My mother was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You figured it out?" I said, "Dad helped." She said, "Yes, he did." The meeting with Marcus happened 10 days after Sandra's letter, not at my parents' house. At Sandra's office, which had been my suggestion and which Marcus had agreed to after his own attorney told him that the documentation Sandra had referenced in her letter was likely sufficient to make a formal contest expensive and difficult. Marcus arrived with his attorney. I arrived with Sandra. My father arrived alone and sat in the chair nearest the window and did not bring a lawyer because he did not believe he needed one, and he was correct. Marcus's attorney made 3 points. The first was that informal transfers of significant assets outside the formal estate process could create family friction. The second was that transparency about the full scope of the estate was in everyone's interest. The third was that his client simply wanted to understand the complete picture. Sandra responded to each point with the documentation from the filing cabinets. The property entity, established in 2009, properly structured, legally clean. The accounts, documented across 40 years, bearing my father's signature and consistent with a pattern of careful long-term asset management. The letter, which my father had signed in Sandra's office 10 days earlier, in front of 2 witnesses. Marcus's attorney read the letter. Then Marcus read it. His face did the thing faces do when a plan encounters something it was not built to address, not collapse, reconfiguration. The specific recalibration of a man who has been operating on an assumption that has just been shown to be incomplete. My father sat by the window and said nothing. At one point, Marcus looked at him directly and said, "Why didn't you tell us?" My father turned the brass level over in his hands. He had brought it with him, which I had not expected. He set it on the table. He said, "I told you what you needed to know when you needed to know it. I did the same for your sister." Marcus looked at the level. He looked at me. He looked at our father. Then he said, in the flattened tone of someone releasing the air from an argument they can no longer pressurize, "What did you tell her that you didn't tell us?" My father said, "Nothing she didn't already understand." The room was quiet. Sandra moved us through the remaining documentation with the efficient clarity of someone who is prepared for every version of this conversation and knows which version she is now in. By the time we finished, Marcus's attorney had nothing left to contest. The boat question resolved itself 3 weeks later through a conversation between Marcus and my father that neither of them has described to anyone. What I know is that Marcus got the boat. He keeps it at a marina 40 minutes from his house and takes it out on Sundays when the weather allows. He texts me photographs occasionally. The boat on the water, the horizon line, sometimes just the water. He does not say much in the messages, but he sends them. Diane got the cabin. She drove up the following spring and spent a week there alone and called me from the porch on the 3rd evening. We talked for an hour about things that had nothing to do with the estate, her job, a book she was reading, a repair the cabin needed that she was not sure how to approach. I told her to check the load-bearing wall before she renovated. She said, "How do I know which one that is?" I said, "I'll come up sometime and show you." She said she would like that. My mother stopped saying, "There is enough for everyone." She says other things now, smaller things, more accurate things, whether the porch boards are holding up, whether I need anything from the store since she is going anyway. Small, specific things that do not need to carry the weight of a philosophy she had been using to avoid a harder conversation for 30 years. I consider it progress. My father calls on Tuesdays. We do not discuss the storage unit, or the letter, or the meeting at Sandra's office. We talk about the garden, the level, whether the back porch boards are holding. Last week he asked about a scan I had mentioned in passing 3 weeks earlier, remembering the detail with the accuracy of someone who listens when other people speak. He has always listened that way. I did not understand for a long time that being listened to like that was its own kind of inheritance. The brass level is on my desk now, not displayed, not mounted or framed or positioned to communicate something to people who visit my apartment. It is on my desk beside my work laptop and a coffee cup and a folder of scan reports I am reviewing for a research paper I have been working on for 4 months. It is a tool. My grandfather used it. My father used it. I use it. The bubble centers when you hold it correctly and take the time to let it settle before you read the result. Rush it and you get an approximation. Give it the time it needs and you get the truth. That is what the level does. That is what the level has always done. My father retired. My family fought over the boat and the cabin and an account they had not earned. My brother prepared legal action against something he could not yet name. My father pressed a key into my hand and told me not to tell them about the storage unit. I called a lawyer. I attended a family meeting and said very little. My father walked me to my car and said, "You see things the way I do." I drove to the storage unit. I found 40 years of documentation, a property my siblings did not know existed, a folder with my name on it containing articles I had published, and a letter that explained every decision my father had made and why. Sandra sent a letter. Marcus called. A meeting happened at Sandra's office. Marcus got the boat. Diane got the cabin. My mother stopped saying there is enough for everyone. My father calls on Tuesdays. Now here is what I want to leave with you. My family spent 3 months fighting over what my father had built. The boat, the cabin, the savings account. They knew what those things were worth because those things had visible prices. What was in the storage unit did not have a visible price. It had 40 years of documentation and a brass level with a chip in the lower left corner and a letter that said, "You are the one who will understand what it means." You cannot fight over something you did not know existed. You cannot contest a relationship that was conducted in the quiet while everyone else was conducting theirs out loud. The storage unit was not a secret kept from my family out of cruelty. It was a record kept by a man who understood that the most important things do not announce themselves. They accumulate, quietly, over 40 years. In a climate-controlled unit behind a gate code written in pencil on a paper tag. He gave the boat to the person who needed something visible. He gave the cabin to the person who needed to own her happiness. He gave the storage unit to the person who had spent 31 years learning to read what was actually there. The measurement does not care how you feel about it. It just tells you whether the thing is level. Tell me in the comments your first name and your city. Tell me if you have ever been the quiet one in a room full of people arguing about something they did not fully understand. Tell me if someone saw you anyway. For more stories like this one, come find us on the channel. Every story here is about someone who was counted out and turned out to be the only one who knew where to look. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.